There's been times in my life where that intuition is so strong and I sometimes ignore it, and then through events it'll come right back to, yep, that's a feeling I had and I should have trusted that.
We do not give enough credence to our intuition, and that's because we don't really truly understand what's going on there. People have no choice but to use intuition. That's what they're doing every single day. Your intuition is the totality, all of your experience to date.
When you strip away the noise, how do we actually make decisions?
The entire field of decision making, it's called judgment under uncertainty. Confirmation bias is pernicious, incredibly powerful, very difficult to avoid. Natural curiosity is something we could do with more in this world.
Hello and welcome to the Real Biz Life Chronicles, where we discuss all things business, branding and life from the Horizon Digital podcast recording studio here in Perth. I'm your host, Tracy Fryer, the founder of Design Studio Perth. And because Design Studio Perth is dedicated to helping business owners grow with distinction through captivating branding and design, we're offering all our listeners a free brand discovery. So if you find yourself frustrated with your current branding and marketing and aren't too sure where to next, use a link in the show notes below to book in a time to have a chat. Now, I don't know about you, but I find the best conversations are had over a great cup of coffee. And so the coffee for each episode of the Real Biz Life Chronicles is brewed for us by no other than the legends at Cuppa Cartel. They're fueling great conversations, one cuppa at a time. Now, the Real Biz Life Chronicles is on a mission to become one of Australia's leading business podcasts, but in order to do that, we please need your help. If you do enjoy today's episode, we please ask that you like and subscribe to our channels below, or simply share this episode with a fellow business owner who is doing one of the hardest things in the world, building a business. Now, if there is a question you'd like us to ask our guests, please feel free to pop it in the comments section below, or simply send us an email at info@therealbizlifechronicles.com. My guest today is a gentleman, the kind of person who, when the lift is out, offers to carry your 40-kilo podcast suitcase packed with your gear up 7 flights of stairs without being asked. Before launching his latest venture, an AI native consulting and simulation modeling platform for orthodontic practices, he was already deep in the guts of strategic decision making. His work sits at the intersection of philosophy of mind, artificial intelligence, and 4E cognitive science. His focus, how humans and machines reshape judgment, and what it really means for leadership. Imagine a mind that could map out the cognitive science of decision making and still choose to stay curious over being certain. He spent years behind the scenes building immersive business simulations for companies like Google, UBS, and Coca-Cola, not to impress, but to make decisions more real. Curious, disciplined, and unassuming is how he has been described. He once hitchhiked solo from Cape Town to Victoria Falls in 1995, and if there's anything he might call brave, that's it. This conversation gets into the complexity behind clarity, what shapes our judgment, what skews it, and why the hardest decisions really show up as yes or no. Dr. Darren Keegan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's quite an intro.
Oh, you're welcome. Darren, so walk us through, what can our listeners expect to learn from our conversation today?
Well, I'm looking forward to being led by you in your questions. So I haven't come with a very specific agenda of what I want to cover. So hopefully it'll be fairly organic in that sense. But yeah, the kind of landscape of things that I'm interested in, intuition and decision making and bias, are the types of areas that I've spent a good deal of time thinking about. And I've been very interested because of the growth of AI and just the explosion in AI recently, and my own involvement with it from a kind of technology perspective as part of a business that uses AI every day. There's a kind of fundamental piece in there about how that is affecting us all, how it shapes our world, and I think that's a question for who we are as humans. As much as it is about the machine. So those are the kind of areas that hopefully we'll dive into.
Yeah, so Darren, your path is not typical. You've moved through academia, corporate education, decision science, and now AI consulting. What thread connects it all for you?
I mean, I think the piece is that they are actually, there's a fair kind of, it's not even a Venn diagram, right? So it's kind of multiple Venn diagrams of areas where they kind of converge and have kind of mutually kind of reinforced themselves. So they probably haven't felt very distinct to me, right? They've probably felt like they're very much all part of the same thing. I guess if there's a thread that kind of pulls them together, it's strategy, an interest in strategy. So, and that really came from a kind of transformative experience for me when I did my MBA, which is many years ago now. But I was working at the time, and I did the MBA while I was involved in, I was in the education sector. I was running a pretty big department. I'd kind of moved quite quickly up and kind of grown into that role. And I did the MBA because I just expected that I would be in that world, and I would be potentially at some point even might run one of these institutions. And so that's kind of what I thought my path was. And then I found myself in an MBA. I was at University of Glasgow, and the class that I loved the most was strategy. It was a professor of strategy there that I really connected with, a guy called Robert McIntosh. And I just loved the work. I loved everything about it. And so it kind of opens your horizons, right? That's one of the things that a master should do, is open your horizon and make you think, okay, maybe the world isn't quite this narrow frame that I've had it in.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about that. That led me on to later on going into PhD, but it got me into the world of executive education. And so I kind of hopped over into that world, which got me into simulation modeling, and kind of I did a PhD from there. So, but the real thread kind of all goes all the way back to that kind of first strategy class, I think.
And walk us through, because strategy is a term that gets thrown around a lot. What do you believe strategy is?
I mean, Robert would have been quite precise about it and would have done a better job than I will of kind of an off-the-cuff description. But, yeah. I mean, simply put, it's about choices, but it's mostly about the idea of having a strategy at all as an organisation. In the companies I've worked with, when you think about strategy, it's very often about having a particular vision for where you want to go and how is it that we're expected to get there. But I think a larger part of it is really a recognition of how many factors are involved and have to be taken into consideration, right? So, but very simply, it's okay. Robert would almost see it as the kind of the analogy with chess, right? So you have to have strategy set out, and you recognize you can be knocked off course. Yeah. But fundamentally, it's about having a plan and knowing the direction that you're and the goals that you're aiming for.
And your degree, what did you study there?
So my first degree was a management degree, but it was actually a marketing degree. And at the time, I think I'm right in saying it was the very first marketing degree that was ever offered in Scotland.
Right.
And that really came from, there's a bit of an interesting part to this. You with your marketing background might be interested in. But so I think this is, the early 90s. At that point in time, marketing was really changing and kind of grown into itself as a discipline. Kind of prior to that, it wasn't really considered a discipline as such, right? You didn't have, now it's ubiquitous to have a chief marketing officer, but that kind of role didn't really exist back then. And there was a real kind of, the world of strategy and the world of marketing were really very similar. If you actually look back at a lot of the textbooks around about that time, they're not distinct. Strategy and marketing were very much kind of part of the same thing. And the reason that was the case, so I think we're about, 1983, Theodore Levitt's paper on globalization comes out. He's the person that coins that term, offshoring, and then thinking about where that's going to lead organizations. And it started to be saying that organizations could be structured entirely differently. So that was a strategic component of it. And the marketing piece of it was, how do you then think about differentiation and branding and so on? So that was all an emergent world at that time. And that kind of came through from the kind of early 90s. By the time I finished, I actually did my first dissertation on Nike. And it was and it was basically, the story was, how did Nike manage to offshore all of its manufacturing to Southeast Asia and then funnel all of the gains that they made in the expensive side into a marketing engine to turn them into the kind of global behemoth they became.
Yeah,
so there you
interesting.
Go. Yeah, that's where I started.
And then from there?
So from there, I had absolutely no interest in going into the world of work, basically. So around about that time is when I started traveling and backpacking, basically, and doing my very best to get out and see other places.
Yeah.
And so I'd been in the States, was hitchhiking around the States after doing some work there in 1994. And then 95, I was actually had finished my degree, but I'd been accepted into honours, but wasn't even sure I was going to go back.
Okay.
And I went travelling. That's when I ended up in Africa.
Yes.
Had a lot of fun there.
Yeah,
and
great.
but I ended up making the decision to go back and do my honours. But I pretty much always had, even at that point, it was, I wasn't interested in going into the corporate world. I really just wanted to travel and to see as much of the world as I could. So that's all I was interested in then.
Yeah, and then so you travelled for a few years?
Yeah, I kind of, so I finished my degree and I ended up starting my first business, which with a friend, and this was over in the US, lived in Texas for a few years. We had a football coaching business, soccer coaching business. So, and that really came just serendipitous. I had a friend who was an ex-professional. He invited me over. I started coaching, met some other people who said, hey, we should start a business doing this. I don't know if I was just putting off everything that would have meant actually going and getting a real job. I have a feeling there was a little bit of that. So I ended up there on and off for 2 or 3 years. But it gave me a chance to live in a different country and experience that. We made almost no money. It certainly wasn't a financially sound decision, but it was good for many other ways.
Yeah, and then off to America. So how did you end up in Perth?
Right, so that's fast forwarding a fair amount of time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's about 8 years ago now, and we had. So it's mostly because of my wife. My wife has some family here. We've got an aunt and uncle of hers, and she travelled here when she came out of school before going to university. She'd come here, visited, spent some time here, lived in the East Coast in Sydney for a good while. And we had visited because I was doing work out here with the company Insurance Australia Group. So this was by the time I'm working in the world of simulation. I'm working with Duke University's corporate education, and I'm helping run programs with executives. And so we'd visited here. We were looking for somewhere different to live other than Glasgow, getting fed up with the weather. and so we were either going to go to the US, where I just started a business, or we're going to come here. And my wife's an engineer, got his permanent residency. And so that won. So here we are, and I haven't regretted it.
Yeah, great. And what's something you believe about how humans make decisions that most people, even experts, would disagree with?
So it's a good question. I particularly feel that we do not give enough credence to our intuition, and that's because we don't really truly understand what's going on there, and it's a far, and I think particularly, let me frame it like this: if you are in the world of business, then typically what's expected of you is that you're analytic, you're rational, that your mind works in such a way that you're able to take situations in an objective fashion. And that emotion, really, there's no place for emotion in it, right, is the way to think about it. And in fact, to bring emotion into it would have been seen as something that had been quite negative for people. People would have said, if you're somebody that brings emotion into your decision-making processes inside an organisation, you're not fit to be in business, right? That's not how you carry out your fiduciary responsibilities and so on and so forth. And so we have this image of, organisations as being these hyper-objective kind of and using structure and processes as a way to make sure that gets done, right, to control for that. And of course, that's nothing like what organisations actually do, how they perform, how they behave. It's nothing like how people inside them behave. And everybody knows this, right? But we have this kind of, this image of it. And the question is really, isn't do people use their intuition to make decisions? It's, are they aware at all of the fact that they're using their intuition to make decisions? Is it acknowledged? Because this has been such an area that most people have naturally avoided because they don't like the implications of it, it's not as well studied. And I think quite differently on the matter.
Yeah, so what's your view on that?
So people have no choice but to use intuition. That's what they're doing every single day. And so let me be quite specific about what I mean. It's not just the fact that you have there's a kind of gut feel, there's a sense of what it is that you should be doing. It's that your intuition is the totality of all of your experience to date. And that experience isn't just what you've reflected on in a kind of intellectual way, in an analytical way, a rational way. It is that. It does have, part of that is obviously contained within it. But the other side of it is that it's a lived experience, right? So let me give a couple of examples. I think that'll help, right? So
yeah, definitely.
You walk into a meeting and it's all of the senior people that are your peer group, and you walk into a meeting inside the room and you're all waiting for the person you report to come into the room. So the senior leader is about to come into the room, and there's just a palpable tension. And you don't know why, but you walk in, but straight away you sense that something is amiss, right?
Yeah.
There's something up. And that individual comes in and they set out for everybody, like, we're going to make a change or a shift in direction. Here's what it's going to be. And they're pushing for a particular, way this has to go. In that moment and in that environment, if you ask somebody what's going on, right, how much of what's going on is actually rational and how much of it's analytical, very little of it is. What's going on is they're able to read all of the subtle cues from all of the people in the room. And they can probably tell you at a glance, I know who's for this, I know who's against it, I know who has a real concern about this, and I know what some of the thinking that's going on in the room is, right? They have a theory of mind for what's going on in the room. None of that's a rational process. It can, once it makes its way into the kind of front of mind, it starts to become something that you can analyse and you can be rational about, and you can think different things. But the actual sense of the whole thing and your intuition about what's going on is one thing. Now, the second piece of that is, at that stage how it is that you feel about it, right? And the question might be, well, why? Well, why do you feel that way? And the chances are you feel that way because of your experience inside the organisation, because of your prior experience, because of how you feel about what you think the direction of the business should be. There's a sum totality of experience that's coming through you at that point that is being processed subconsciously, and it is telling you the direction of travel that you feel you should go in. It's telling you whether or not you should be 100% on board about this and a vocal supporter, or whether or not you should be more reserved and more contained, whether you should wait to hear from others, whether you should try and draw out others. All of that's going on. And if you think about the process that has to be in place for that to happen, when I talk about intuition, that's what I mean. The intuitive sense of what is right in the moment. So there's always a value judgment. And that's really the key thing to get to, is that intuition is about the fact that there's a value judgment going on at every moment in your day. And that's what your intuitive sense is. And it comes from your direct experience. Does that make sense?
It does, because there's been times in my life where that intuition is so strong and I sometimes ignore it. And then through events, it'll come right back to, yep, that's a feeling I had and I should have trusted that. So I guess my question is, how can we actually be more intuitive? And are you saying to embrace that more?
So absolutely. And but the first thing is recognition, right? So and a good bit of my PhD work was around thinking through this issue, right? And it's because it's, if you think about kind of decision-making process, right, the natural way of thinking about this is, well, okay, we've got a choice to make between this and this, right? And so we get two different things that we can do. Let's gather as much information as we possibly can. Let's then decide how it is that we're going to evaluate that information. What would we consider as good, what was bad, and then we'll use all of that, and then we'll come to some kind of definitive response over which of these scores higher than the other, right? Which of these ones look like the best option for us. And everyone assumes that they do something similar when it comes to the decisions that they're involved in, right? And of course, that's not what's going on. And so often what I'm trying to get folks to recognize is to say, firstly, be aware of exactly why it is, or exactly what it is that you feel in a given situation. So that cue, so if I said to you, you're that person in that room listening to this presentation from your boss, be very aware of what it is that you're feeling in that moment. And then that's the place that you want to examine, because the question then becomes, well, why do I feel that, right? And in particular, the place that starts to get really interesting is a thing I call rational or intuitive validity, because sometimes you can be rational or you can use intuition, and both of them are perfectly valid. But there's times when they're both invalid, where it's the wrong time to use it, right? It's the wrong time to think about. So what it is that's the path you should be following. So often what I would say is, are you aware of the intuition in the first place? And if you are, can you then find the source of it, right? Why is it that I feel that way? So let's say you've got a really strong negative reaction to something. Why is that? Is it self-preservation? Is it related to the fact? And one of the things that we uncover in the research, for example, is that often it's related to something that's happened previously that has left some particular scar on you, right? Or is because it's always the most peak experiences that you remember. A good example of this is people that have gone through acquisitions and mergers. Very few people talk about them fondly, right?
Actually, that's a good point. Yes.
Almost no one.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on the convos I've had about that with people. Yeah, that's so true.
Right. So if you think of it like this, so let's say that you've been through an acquisition fairly recently. Either you were brought in as part of an acquisition, or another business was brought into your area, and you've gone through this, and you know just how difficult the integration was. There's a period of time where people have got completely different, roles and responsibilities, and it might even be that people have different terms and conditions, right? You're working beside people who have better conditions than you, just as a function of what's happened here. And as the company tries to sort all of that out, you're in this kind of maelstrom of having to deal with it. It's an emotional roller coaster. It's very difficult. You're probably concerned as whether or not you're going to keep your job and all of that stuff. And then if you ask somebody, 2 years down the line, we're talking about acquiring that business there, X, and rolling them into us, most people's immediate and initial response, but it's a terrible idea, right? Because their immediate kind of emotional response is you don't want to go through all of that again.
No.
If you can avoid it. And so that, now I would then say, well, hang on. Could you honestly say that those two circumstances are the same? All that we know about them is that it's the experience of going through an acquisition, but maybe you're 2 years on. Maybe you're a different person now, right? Because you're 2 years on. So you're a different person. The environment you're in is completely different. This other company is not the company that you previously acquired. They could be completely different. They might be, acquiring this company might be amazing, right? It could give you opportunities that you never had. All of this is unknown. But that's not what people's initial reaction is. So I would say that it would be invalid at that point to rely on what your intuition is telling you to say, no, we shouldn't go forward with this.
Right.
Because the reality is that you haven't properly assessed and you don't know. And so at that point, it's just simply a recognition of the fact and saying, I know why I feel like that. I had a terrible experience before and I don't want to repeat it. And that's reasonable, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the basis for a decision. It's not the basis for a disposition towards the new acquisition that you should have. But that's a leap. There's a cognitive leap in there that people won't make because they just have the strength of the experience and the strength of the intuition, and that's pretty much what dominates.
And when you strip away the noise, how do we actually make decisions? And I know you've touched on this briefly in the previous answer.
I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that because it's because the simple truth is there's a blend. Okay, so there's probably the best way to do it is something that I'm sure many of people that listen to you and yourself you'll be aware of. So have you heard of Daniel Kahneman's work, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow? That's probably a good place to do this. So from the psychological literature and what we understand in this domain, there are effectively two systems or two types of processing is actually better language rather than them being systems. So it's a type of processing. One of them's fast, it's automatic, it's intuitive. And this is a type of, basically the way that we get through life day to day, right? So everything that's going on to, from what it is you have for breakfast to everything else, the variety of things that you have to do, most of it you're not really spending any great kind of cognitive power on, right? That's your fast automatic systems. You've then got what we call type 2 or system 2 processing, which is effortful, right? You actually have to engage yourself in it. We could do a quick experiment if you want.
Yeah, of course, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So if I said to you, 2 plus 2.
Yeah.
You're immediately there, right?
Yeah.
You got 4? I think. 17 times 17.
Oh my goodness, Darren, you're testing me.
So you don't have to answer that.
Yeah.
Did you notice that in the moment where I say 17 times 17, the minute you have to engage in that seriously, something shifts within you. You feel it. There's a genuine felt sense.
There is, yes, and the facial.
Yeah, exactly, right. And the felt sense is you engaging basically the full kind of powerful machinery of the mind to basically do the job of saying we have to work harder now. There has to be some real cognitive load. And so the minute you're put into situations where your processing has to shift into something far more effortful and so on, that's basically, and so decisions are taken in one of those two domains, right? Now, probably one of the people that I like most in this area is a guy called Keith Stanovich, who's a Canadian professor. And he talks about how we have almost kind of three minds. He talks about as having this kind of intuitive mind, but he also talks about as having an algorithmic mind, and then which is really just this ability to kind of, I think, kind of do computation. But then the third piece of it's reflective. Right, and the reflective piece is what he thinks is the thing that really distinguishes type 2 from type 1 process and system 1 from system 2. And so this ability to reflect on the thing that's the object of the decision that you're making and basically the entire process. But the thing about that is this term where he says we are cognitive misers. And what he means by that is because it's so computationally expensive and so effortful for the system has to avoid it. So in all instances, we are reverting to our kind of type 1 or automatic or fast systems. So we're making most decisions like that because that's the most, because otherwise the cognitive load is too much, the processing power. If you were to be in a true kind of state of always on, always being fully rational, always considering every potential implication for every decision, you'd never get anything done.
No.
And you'd be exhausted, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically, so when you ask, how are we actually making decisions, it's basically one of those two things is what's going on.
It's so interesting. And I actually felt that when you asked me, I was like, oh, my brain was like 10 times 10. It's been a while. I need my nephew to help with my times tables. Darren, if you could redesign the way leaders are educated from the ground up, not MBAs, not corporate training as it exists now, what would you build instead?
That's a good question. I have fairly esoteric views on that, and I don't think that we are doing a very good job of equipping leaders, managers for the world that they find themselves in. I think what we're doing is we are kind of perpetuating a way of approaching the world of business that I don't think is fit for our true reality. But a lot of that has to do with just another area of interest that I'm involved in, and that's, can business be a force for good?
Yes, that's one of my questions for you, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe this kind of tips into that side of it there. So there's there's one view of it, which is to say, my critique of MBAs, for example, right? And I had an amazing experience. This isn't a kind of, a reflection on the quality of the people that I had deliver the course or what I had as an experience. But if you take what every single one of those are, you have this world that is defined by its very nature. It has to be siloed, right? Because you take any kind of subject, take strategy, and you say, okay, so we need a class on strategy. I need a class on economics. I need a class on marketing. And why do you need that? Because those disciplines have just a massive literature that gets increasingly specialized all the way down. And those specializations that come from people that are doing postdoctorate work and the kind of the academy kind of writ large, what that produces, the places where we can find areas that are generalizable, that's what finds its way into the classroom and what finds its way into kind of general use in businesses. And so if you're an executive that goes through an MBA, or you're getting kind of corporate education that's delivered to you by professors or people from there, what they're doing is they're kind of standing on the shoulders of all of that work that's been done by people that have been incredibly focused. Now, that advances our understanding and our knowledge. But here's what it doesn't do. It doesn't say, well, okay, how should marketing work with strategy? And what do strategists need to understand about economics? And what do they need to understand about the people function in the world of work? And almost nobody that's involved in doing MBAs, if you ask how many of them found that their professors spoke to each other, so that what they experienced was this kind of cohesive, course that brought all of those disciplines together and talked about how they worked inside an organisation. Almost nobody had that experience.
Yeah.
In fact, I can't think of a single MBA that's structured that way, right? And because they're not, you end up with real challenges down the line. So that's probably the first thing to say about that piece. Let me give a quick anecdote, and then I'll kind of pass it back to you. Jimmy Iovine, who's the music producer, if you've ever heard of him, so he's the guy. More recently, he's famous for being the guy that co-founded Beats with Dr. Dre.
Oh, right, yes, that's why I've heard the name.
Worked at Apple, sold into Apple, so he's been an incredibly successful business person. Started out life as the sound engineer for John Lennon, and then had an incredible career. Worked with U2 and just whole host of people,
Amazing.
right? So he's an amazing career. But he's set up an institution recently that, having worked in the world of technology with people like Apple, he said, what's amazing is you go in there and nobody knows how to speak to each other. He said, so you get manufacturing, logistics and supply chains and all of this stuff, and then you've got all the creatives, and nobody knows how to talk to each other.
Right.
And he said, so we've set up this kind of multidiscipline thing where what they basically do is they take people who are interested in those areas and they put the engineers alongside the creatives, and they put them in, they make them do projects together so that they understand each other, so that they can speak to each other. And having spent a lot of time in corporate education, I can tell you a lot of time is spent saying, hey, we've got problems with silos, we've got problems with how disparate groups find themselves, and communication inside the organisation is always a problem.
Always.
And there you go, you've got a guy like Jimmy Iovine that say he actually set up an institution in order to do that, which is apparently doing really, really well. And it's and I look at it and say, that's really what an MBA or education should really be. It really has to be that, this kind of collective enterprise, project-driven, where you go deep into your specialism, but only in service to this kind of broader concern. Because I often say your domain expertise is a double-edged sword, right? It's a double-edged sword because it's the very thing that gives you the ability to just exist inside the organization, do the work that you need to do, but at the same time, you understand it at a level that very few people do, and you put yourself together with other people in your peer group that know it. You just make problems more complex, and you typically tend to go in one direction. You tend to see all of the things that need to happen for the thing to work in the way that you want it to. And that often means that you then become even more distant from the people who are also doing the same thing in their own domains. So the double-edged sword piece of it is, yes, it brings us a huge amount of capability, but then you're even less able to share it.
Yeah, right. And is part of what you do helping organisations with that?
Yeah, I'm a big piece. I did work. I've done work with a lot of businesses that have been focused on exactly that, and we built simulations to do that, to do that job, where we've given people situations and said, okay, you're going to launch a product, and all of the different people, and you represent different parts of the organization. You're given just a small set of kind of points that are specific to you and your domain. Yeah. And then you're told, okay, now you have to decide whether to launch or not. And it's amazing how few of them will go and seek out the advice of others, will talk to other groups, will try and get collectively together. Everyone wants to solve it from their own perspective.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we build simulations to that kind of work. I mean, it's always, what's amazing is it's eye-opening for people, but it doesn't necessarily change their behaviour. Oh,
right. Yeah. So they want to just operate on their own?
What you tend to find is that, that people they gravitate towards their peers more naturally, right? And it's like, I'm much more comfortable in this conversation over here talking to my fellow software developers and engineers, right? I'm much more comfortable here. Like, I get what finance and what the finance function does and why it's important, but I don't really want to have to take on your concerns as well as my own. I've got enough problems trying to deal with the stuff I've got to deal with, right? Trying to solve yours as well. But of course, what that ends up being is you end up with the biggest problem you have with it is competing incentives. So, what are the incentives and what are the goals that the engineering team has versus what the marketing team has? because I can guarantee you they'll be conflicting, because what the marketers want and what they need from the product teams to get out in front of customers to allow them to do their job isn't what the engineers want. The engineers are saying, no, we have to get it to a point where we are happy with it and comfortable, and we know it works and so on before it comes anywhere near you.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas the marketers are saying, no, I need something in front of me right now. So I can
Yeah. And what's the truth about yourself that your work has helped you uncover that you weren't ready to see?
I'm always terrible with these kind of questions.
No.
I always find them quite difficult to answer.
Or perhaps there's something really interesting about human behaviour that you...
So I think whether or not it's been something that's kind of surfaced for me, it's made me think, I didn't know I was like this, or I didn't know that I thought this thing about it. I would always say there's been a process of discovery in everything I've done. Probably I'm continually reminded of just how little I know in all of the domains that I work in. I'm continually surprised by just the kind of the capabilities that I find in other people. You're always there's always so much to learn, right? And so just that kind of having a natural curiosity, I think, is helped a lot in my kind of life and the work that I've done. I'm kind of naturally curious to kind of want to learn more and to want to think and be reflective. But yeah, I think it's mostly that's kind of been the defining trait, if you like, is just in all of the things that I've been involved in, is just this kind of natural drive towards, well, what can I know more about in this domain, and who are the people I should speak to, and every time you do that, you realise just how deep people's knowledge and experience is, which is always quite humbling, which I think it should be.
Yeah, you mentioned the word reflective quite a few times, and reflection is a tool I've taught myself to set time aside and really do. How do you utilise that in your practice?
Often I write, so I'm reflective. I often find out what I'm thinking by either because I'm having a conversation about it, or because I have to write it. So having a reflective practice where it's internalized, that's not how I approach it. What I might find myself in a conversation with people that I work with or kind of close colleagues, and we'll be wrestling with something, and often what's coming out at the time, you surprise yourself, right? You're like kind of, turns out that's what I think about it. I consider that a process of reflection. You're kind of saying, clearly there's and because obviously the work I've done in intuition, I think of my subconscious has been grinding away at this, obviously like kind of working hard at trying to kind of get a sense of what it is that I think and feel about a subject, and it comes out there. So often it's at the point that it gets articulated, that it gets externalized for me, and sometimes I can force that if I write. So I'll sit down and and often that'll just be writing about particular something that we're involved in, whether that's a business problem I have. I'll write out different aspects of it. Can I say one thing that might be interesting?
Yeah, of course, please do.
I use AI now for that.
Same.
Yeah. And
it's great.
Tell me how you do it.
So I have a morning practice where I'll journal and pray, and I find sometimes something might have happened the day before, and it could have triggered a feeling within me, and I'm of the mindset if that happens, there's something there that I need to work through. So then I'll put that into ChatGPT, and I might say like, what might this mean for for the experience, whatever the case may be. And then it's great. It kind of will give you these suggestions as to what way it could sort of go. And I just really love it, because sometimes you think a bit further than my nose. And and then a question might arise from doing that process. And then I might put that back into, AI as well. And then it gives me this whole other perspective. So yeah, I really love it. It's great.
So it's an amazing thing, and I think it could so easily be misconstrued, right, about what's going on there. So if I was to play some of that back to you, what I hear you doing is I've taken something, some kind of situation, some scenario, and I've got this instant, here's my intuitive sense about what that means to me, right? Here's what it's bringing up for me, and I'm going to put that in and say, what do you think of this?
Yeah.
And if it's had some of those conversations with you before, and even if it hasn't, right, then it starts to get a sense of what you're like. But in terms of what it comes back with, notice that when it comes back with something, the first thing that happens is you have an immediate value judgment, right? And your value judgment is to say, it gave me 6 things, 5 of them are not at all, or they're okay, they're fine, they're kind of, but this 6th one, or this other one, that really has nailed something about, and either you go one of 2 ways. You're either saying, that is exactly not what I meant, and I'm interested to explore it. Okay, now that wasn't what I was thinking at all, and here's why. Or you go, that's exactly on the money. That's exactly the kind of the aspect of this that's important to me. I want to dig in there. And then what I find is that, so in the conversations I have, I often have these massive prompts where I could have written 400 words, right? 500 words.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing in there is I'm unloading what's in my mind at the point in time about that particular scenario. And I write, and it's in the same way that if I'm externalizing it in conversation, it comes out and it's of all of this detail, and it helps me sharpen up what it is that I actually think about the thing, because you're stripping away all of the kind of detritus that's around something. You're getting to something that's just closer and closer and closer to the specific of what it is that you genuinely feel or think about a scenario. And I just find that, the thing about the machine is it's happy to do it with you for as long as you want to do it. Not everyone is.
Yes, my one is very forgiving. Darren, what's the difference between a decision and a judgment, and what happens when leaders confuse the two?
So I always think of a decision as it's basically something is executed, right? So at the point a decision is made, we've got to the point of execution, right? Where we're doing one thing over another. Yeah. And you're stepping through a door by that point, right? And you don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but that's what you've done. The entire field of decision making from a psychological perspective, when you take in all the kind of cognitive bias and all of that area, it's called judgment under uncertainty. That's what it's referred to. So, and the point there is to say, well, what is going on to kind of bring you to some kind of a judgment about a situation, right? What is it that's making you think the thing that you think about a scenario, or why are you behaving the way that you're behaving? Yeah. And the two are often kind of, if there's a distinction to be made from your question, it's less judgment versus decision, and much more in terms of the judgment itself. It's how much of that judgment is something that is expressed in behaviour, right? And how much of it is something that that's a kind of internalized, right? So often it's another way to think of that is, why is it that people are behaving the way they are behaving, right? Yeah. And how much are they aware of why they're behaving in that way? And that's where there's been now 50 years worth of research to kind of reveal, well, we do very, very strange things, right?
We do, yes. I think some people don't understand. I mean, I did a bit of NLP, and I kind of got a bit more insight into why I might, do certain things that I do. But I think most people don't realise why they do. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. It's but it kind of has to be like that. It's like in the sense that if you were as aware in every single moment of all of the inputs and the effects that they were having on you, right? How do you keep track? Yeah. Right? You can't. And so it's our minds, our brains are incredible for that. I often think, like, if you give examples, I'll give people, I'll say, you get in a car and you'll drive home, and you could have gone from the place that you get in your car, and you get out of the car and you realize you don't remember a single thing in the journey, right? Yeah. You're like, it's
actually scary.
I actually don't remember. Did I brake for red lights? I mean, I'm assuming I did. You did, but you went through all the mechanics and of driving a car, and you went through everything, and you had all of the kind of sensory awareness that you require to get you through that journey. But your mind was elsewhere. And so you've taken all of that ability to do it, and it's been, it's effectively been kind of pushed down into something that's now a subconscious part of what you do. Yeah. And everything's like that's any kind of skill that you acquire over a period of time, any capability. And this is just your mind's ability to then say, okay, we've learned how to do this, and we're good enough at now that we don't have to be as aware. But you remember the first time you learned to drive. Remember just the absolute massive sensory overload of trying to be aware of what you're looking at, listening to somebody give you instruction, managing the controls.
Yeah.
Right? So it's so much. And then think about everything else that goes on in your life. If you had to be constantly aware of all of that at every point, you couldn't do it. So
No.
you couldn't function.
So true. Yeah, it's interesting because one doesn't stop and think about that either. So
No.
yeah.
Yeah, and so the idea of being reflective, I would set aside. I would say that, this ability to be reflective in such a way that we can think back to the ways that we behaved and say, now, what's interesting, if you look at like two different traditions, if I said to you, if you take Zen, Buddhism, those traditions, do you meditate?
I do.
Okay,
yes.
so if you take any of those contemplative traditions, they all have this view of saying you need to be aware that there's a prior level of consciousness. Can you get to a point where you're not thinking? Can you get to a point where you're not caught up in the stream of thoughts that's going? Very hard to do.
So hard.
So hard to do. But so the contemplative traditions have always known this, and that's part of what prayer is. And then all of that is really about kind of putting you into a state, normally through ritual, normally through some kind of set of, environmental kind of set up, the space that you're in order to put you in a place where you can do that, right? And access a kind of deeper layer of yourself, right? But that's about turning off this constant chatter. The Stoics did something really similar. The Stoics would say that you had to be aware of what you were doing. Like if you take Marcus Aurelius, for anyone that's read any of the Meditations, if you look at it, what he's doing in that entire text, which is incredible, is it's how can he be in the moment as aware of the virtues as he is living them, thinking of them from a third person perspective, to be able to kind of objectively assess, okay, I'm doing this right now, I'm in this conversation, and am I being the most honest, am I being the most courageous, am I being the most compassionate version of myself that I could be? And the Stoics would say that that's what having an examined life is all about, is being able to recognize that, but to try and do it in real time is almost impossible. But they come at the same thing from the same place, right?
Interesting. And so you've designed simulations for some of the world's biggest companies. What's something that simulations revealed about power that most people miss?
What does it reveal about power? I'm trying to think of specific simulations that had that as an outcome or that as a goal. I'll probably come at it from a slightly different angle.
Sure.
Simulations are amazing for getting people to behave and forget themselves, right? So you can put people in situations that, although it's a kind of, it's artificial, right? It's a constructed, I could give you, okay, you're now part of this company is a fictitious company, it's very like your company, but it exists in this world, and here's market conditions, and here's what might happen in 10 years' time, and I'm going to give you a set of scenarios and decisions to take, and you have to make them as if you are the executive leadership team driving that business forward. And people will very quickly get into the cadence of that, and they'll become enveloped in the world, and they'll make decisions from that place. Now, when we can kind of see people they just act in the same way that they would act were they in that situation, because all you can do is bring yourself, the fullest version of yourself, right? Because otherwise you'd have to be acting, and most people don't want to act. It's quite hard work to act like that. It is. Right? So for the most part, people just do what they would do. And so what it reveals is a lot about how that person would. And so from my point of view, I'm interested in saying, okay, so you had this kind of intuitive sense, this value judgment about the thing that you wanted to do. What was that based on? Where did it come from? Why do we think it exists? Where does everyone else sit in this? And when it relates to power, one of the things that I think the piece that it often shows you is the power of things that are unseen and unsaid inside businesses. And so the force of culture is probably the biggest piece of that. So when we talk about power, often organizations and people within them are operating on assumptions that just aren't explicit, right? So in the literature, we talk about deep structural rules, but if you can think of it as an expression of culture, just, well, that's not how we do it here, right? That's not, we don't, and an example might be a company that's business to business, and you say, have you ever done any business to consumer? And it's just, no, we don't do that. And we say, why would you not do that? There's this opportunity here. Why would you not? Oh, no, that's not what we do. And you say, well, tell me more about that. And you discover that 15 years ago they tried it and it was a disaster, and so now the company won't even touch it, and you say,
even go there.
But you're 15 years later, the world has changed. The world is completely different.
Yeah.
Why would you still hold that belief that you can't do this? Some companies grow because of acquisition. And so they view acquisition, they say, we're an acquisitive company. We're very good at buying other businesses, bringing them into us, growing and so on. We're great at it. And so that's how they see growth. They don't really think of it as being an organic thing that they have to build the things internally. Whereas you've got companies that are completely the opposite and will say, we grow organically, we do our own thing, we avoid acquisition, we don't believe in acquisition, we don't believe that's the path to growth. And you speak to people inside those organisations and they end up having quite a narrow frame of what it is that they would consider. And actually many of them, if you said to them, how long have you been in the organisation? And they say, well, I've been here 2 years. And you say, so you weren't here at all when any of this prior stuff happened. And yet you've been entirely assimilated into a view of the world that says, here's what we do and here's what we don't do. And there's a value attached to both of those things. We value that, we don't value that. And that's what culture looks like on the inside.
Yeah, definitely.
So you see, that's the kind of thing that gets revealed in simulations, because you can look at it and you can say, look, this is a company that's a fictitious company. It's not even you.
Yeah.
And yet you behave like this. Isn't that interesting?
So interesting. And how do leaders misuse data, and what would you say is the cost of that misuse? It's
probably best explained by confirmation bias, right? And so we would say, so confirmation bias, the desire to seek out information that accords with a set of beliefs and values, the things that you already happen to believe are true. So I think this project A is better than project B. Let me go find all the data that supports project A, and I'm going to ignore, or I'm certainly going to downplay, and in fact there will be cognitive dissonance around any data that shows me that project B could be better, right?
Interesting, yeah.
And if I find data that shows me that I'm wrong, I'll ignore it.
Right. So your mind's kind of filtering it through that?
So what people are often doing is, once you've got it's very seldom that you find people that are able to say, yeah, okay, it turns out that I was completely mistaken in the thing that I want. And often that's because of how invested they are, right? So I'm invested in project A. This is the right path to go down for me, for my team, for the, and so on, right? So there's a lot typically that's riding on these types of things. But so often that's what's going on. And so you've got these kind of value judgments attached to it.
Can you almost like dig a hole for yourself? So you might get like a feeling, and then your mind kind of starts looking for the patterns that kind of, or intuition, sorry. So you might have intuition about, intuitive thought about something, and then your brain starts to filter everything through that. Can you kind of like go down a really dark hole and it's none of it's actually even true?
Well, and I think that people often do, right? And they find themselves in positions of saying, I attach myself to a belief that there were many, many signs that were telling me that was actually the wrong place to be, that the world was moving in a different way, and I kind of steadfastly stuck with the thing that I happened to believe was true, and my confirmation bias meant that I was unprepared for the world. I've got a personal example of this if you want to hear it.
Yeah, please, yeah.
And so it's so Scotland voted for independence, had an independence referendum in 2014. I've always been a supporter of independence, part of the world I come from, and really just driven by a sense of we as a country want to make decisions for ourselves, right? Yeah. And so we just want that level of independence to be able to make the right decisions for Scotland and to build the kind of Scotland that we wanted to live in, which we felt at the time. I grew up in the Thatcher years in Scotland, and so industries decimated as a result. And so all of the hardship that I grew up in a kind of working class area. So I saw all of what that did to the place, and whole generation of people that were effectively had nowhere to go, right? The industry shut down, they had nowhere to go. And so there was a lot of poverty. And so I was always a supporter of independence, just simply because I said we could have had some control over that of what happened there. We had absolutely, you'd be lucky to find 15% of the population that would have wanted to vote for independence when it got announced that we were going to actually have a referendum. We never thought that would happen in our lifetime. And very quickly to say, over the course of 2 to 3 years, Scotland had just had this absolute festival of engagement politically, which is quite difficult to explain to people. But for just the average person everywhere to be debating is independence the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? How do you think about how we should be governed? What do you think about a constitution? What do you think about all of these issues, right? And so the country was transformed for a couple of years, and many people would say for good and for bad, but fundamentally it was a transformative experience. And I was in part of Glasgow. Glasgow voted yes. It felt to us like the momentum was building and that we were going to vote yes.
Yeah.
And the very last poll on the Sunday before it was 50-50. So it went from about 15% to 20%, some would say, up to nearly. So we convinced nearly 30% of the population, ended up being 45% voted yes, right?
Right, yeah.
So we lost and it was devastating. But in particular, it was devastating for me and friends because we had pretty much surrounded ourselves with people and media that, now you'd have to understand that the mass media, there were no kind of no news stations. There was only one newspaper we could think of, and this was a Sunday newspaper in Scotland that was supportive of independence. Everything else was promoting the kind of no campaign, very skewed towards that. That was just the reality of it. So it was the kind of anti-establishment thing, I suppose. But fundamentally, what that meant is, to get media or to get voices that wanted to vote yes, you had to go to other sources. And actually, Facebook was incredibly important at that time, and basically changed the ability to share, find articles, share articles, and so on. So this was all. But what that meant is that's all I read, and I only read and I only kind of really engaged with people that were for, which of course is I shouldn't have done. I should have been much more broad. But even if you took an article in The Economist and I happen to think The Economist journalism is excellent, they tend to be pretty balanced, and even that. But if I saw anything that was against independence, then you just immediately dismiss it, right? And it meant that when it actually came time for the result of the vote, I was quite unprepared for how badly affected I would be by it,
right?
Because I'd built myself into a position of real kind of, we talk about echo chambers now from social media, but that was one of the earliest examples of that. We kind of built an echo chamber of people that felt that it was going to happen. So confirmation bias is pernicious, incredibly powerful, very difficult to avoid, because it's getting at something that's a core value, a core belief, and we want to, our system tells us to go towards that, right? Be in a place of comfort, be in a place where, you're getting something reciprocal. So there you go.
The question that's coming to mind is around influence, because I guess, how can we tell if we're making a decision from our core value or if we're being influenced by someone, especially in like a corporate setting?
Often people are leading double lives, right?
Yes, that's true.
And I can say that as somebody who sits outside of it. So they're leading double lives because there's, and by the way, this is, if the life of somebody who's an entrepreneur who has decided to run and their own business, and not be in that world, which I've not been in for many, many years, I think of the trade-off as this: I get all of the pressure on the roller coaster of not knowing whether the business will exist in 6 months, a year or two. It's always impossible to know exactly where you're going to be.
Definitely.
It's very difficult and it's incredibly stressful. And most people, if you said to them, would you trade the security that you have of knowing a paycheck's turning up with this world here? Many people will say no. They say, no, just give me the security, and I'm going to build my life off of that, which is what most sensible people do.
Yes.
What they trade off is freedom, right? And they trade off, and because in the freedom that I'm particularly thinking about is very often what's happening is people are having to conform to a way of seeing the world. They're having to navigate politics. They're having to navigate all of these different stresses and strains of just a completely different sort. And they're very often not able to be quite the person that they want to be. Some people are. Some people, get through it and are very well suited to it, right? And I've met many people who are and who love it, and it's not. And I don't think that either is better or worse than the other, right? I think it's just what do you actually want for yourself, and where do you feel most comfortable. I've had occasions where I've thought maybe I should go back into what I sometimes think of as the real world. I think should you go back into that
does
world?
It cross your mind?
Yeah, every now and again.
Yeah.
It has over the last 10, 15 years that I've been doing. I guess 15. Yeah, at least now. I mean, it's if it doesn't come up fairly regularly, I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Because it is such a roller coaster.
Oh, it is completely.
I take it you have some similar thoughts.
Yes, probably maybe twice a year. I have a moment where I'm just like, it's all too hard, I'm done, and I have a massive meltdown, my poor advisor. But then I kind of just, he'll say stuff, like he would say to me, well, let's just chuck the towel in and quit. And I'm like, no, we cannot. What are you doing? But he's really good like that. So, but at least twice a year, I'd say, it hits me pretty bad. And I'm just like, because it is really tough, You've opted for this life where there's little stability, but you're driven by this passion and this why, and some days it's just all too hard. But they don't happen, and I find the longer I've been in business, the less it tends to happen. Did you say you've been in business for 15 years? So
independently, not part of an organisation. It's a long time now, and I work kind of independently. Is I guess an independent consultant. I own a little consultancy business, but really that was just a vehicle that I've worked with a simulation business, and I just spent a good few years kind of traveling around the world, helping run executive programs, getting involved with Duke, and then that kind of led the pathway. And then, but the Sapien business is about 8 years old, so there was probably a good between 5 and 7 years just prior to that I was kind of building up to that point. And I've been doing it, my own with a small team of people ever since.
Yeah, amazing. And the biggest challenge, Darren?
The biggest challenge in my world, I would say, is how to scale without funding. That's really it. We've kind of had an interesting trajectory because although we're a technology business, we're really a kind of corporate ed business. So we're a service-based organisation that used to use simulations as a centrepiece for executive development, corporate education programs, right? So we would be in, high-level programs, 3 or 4 days. You might be away on, in some kind of lots of people flying in from different parts of the world to be somewhere for a few days, and we'd be delivering all of the content. There'd be teaching, do work in decision making, and all of that. And simulations would be a part of it. So it was really there was a service-based offer with a kind of technological component in the middle of it, whereas now we're basically a technology business. And so we've kind of, and what would normally happen in a technology business is you would say, okay, we've got a technology, can we go out and find funding and backing, and we've got a kind of 2-year runway to make this happen. If you can get seed investors and angels involved at an early enough point. And we never really had that model. So I've never had that experience. And so the challenge has been, and at a certain point you kind of say, okay, well, what's the next level of growth? And I've always found that tension really important, because if you're going to try and build a team, you have to know that you can pay that team. You have to know your payroll, and so with service business, that's the challenge. That's where it becomes. You've kind of got to just do that in a kind of gradual, steady kind of state. And I work in an environment that's also we're typically quite a small business for the types of businesses we work with, right? So they're not used to working necessarily with companies as small as us. They like working with us because we're agile and responsive, and we have kind of I've got a little kind of niche play, if you like. But all of that brings instability, all of it.
And Darren, as business owners, how can we make better decisions?
I think, well, the first thing is something that you actually said that you did. Have others who are outside of the business. If I was to put it this way, right, after 50 years of research in cognitive bias, we've got Nobel laureates and Daniel Kahneman, and also for the behavioural economics side. So it's produced Nobel laureates. It's an incredible kind of breadth of literature. But if you were to try and find any of them that had hard and fast advice and rules, and here are things that absolutely have been proven to work, there's almost nothing. right? There's some techniques, there's some approaches, there's some things that you can do, but actually there's not that much that is incredibly well proven to just work. Otherwise you'd know about it, right? Otherwise it would just be standard practice, and it's not. So, but one of the things that is in that whole area that's recognised as being something that you absolutely require is a third person stance, an objective stance. It's funny, if you look at things like cognitive behavioural therapy, one of the things that they talk about is having this ability to kind of have like an outside voice. And often that's, if I said to you, okay, if I took a situation that you happen to be in and say you've got a dilemma around this, and I said, imagine this is your best friend. And you need to give advice to your best friend. What are you telling them to do?
Yeah.
And very often that advice is different to what you're actually currently doing.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And it's like, so you'd be saying to your best friend, right, okay, here's what I think. I think you should be doing this instead of that. And you need to do X, Y, and Z. And you won't take that advice from yourself. But if somebody else gives you that advice, you'll consider it.
Yeah.
Right?
Very true.
And so the same principle. So there's a thing in there's kind of devil's advocate type approaches that really work. So I would say make better decisions, have people that can be trusted, that understand the domain well enough to be able to so that they're credible to you.
Yeah.
Okay, and as long as they're credible to you, have that, make sure that you're taking those outside views on and taking different perspectives. It's a really nice little tool that I do like called the pre-mortem.
Okay.
Will I share that?
Yeah, please.
So we know what a post-mortem is, right? So the pre-mortem is a device that's intended to say, well, okay, we're about to make a specific decision. So let's assume that everything up until now, we've done all of the work that we're supposed to do to say, here's a decision, we're now ready to execute. We chose project A over project B, right? Yeah. So you've got to that stage. Now what you do is you say, okay, let's do a thought experiment. Let's imagine that it's 6 or 12 months down the line and we went with project A and it's been a disaster, right? It could not have gone worse. The question is why? Why did it go so badly? Now what it does is it forces groups to have and you set it up and you say you have to have the same amount of, intellectual clout, right? The same amount of willingness to go after this in the way that you would to say, here's all the reasons why project A is going to, here's how we make sure it's a success, right? So the same kind of rigor that you would approach it with, approach the question of why it failed. And if you do that, what you normally find is that there'll be individuals that will say, well, there is this one thing that I was thinking that's a concern, and maybe we've not thought about the customer, or maybe we might not be able to do X as easily as we think we'll be able to do it, or, and then often what you get is you've got to kind of control it quite well, because it can get out of hand and it just becomes a place where everyone wants to tell you all the reasons they don't like the idea, and that's not what it's about. It's about being able to say, have we genuinely thought about the trying to uncover blind spots, and it's basically the counterpoint to confirmation bias, right? It's a counterpoint to confirmation bias. It's a counterpoint to groupthink. It's a counterpoint towards the halo effect of bosses or with people with particular social status and gravitas inside, or you're trying to recognize that these are all the things that can confound decisions, and you want to find a way to avoid that. So you carry out a pre-mortem, and you actually find you can do this quite quickly, right? Because people will already have been thinking about the potential challenges, and you can just go through them and then say, okay, are these things real? Is there anything here on this list of things that we've just been able to say is something we really need to look at again? And maybe there is. Yeah. But you at least can say to yourself, if we've done that and we've done it honestly and with real respect for the work, then you'll make better decisions.
Yeah. Darren, I feel like we could chat for days. My last question is, what's a question you're still trying to answer and aren't sure you ever will?
Question I'm trying to answer that I find it difficult to answer because there's just something about I'm quite in the moment, right? I actually don't tend to think that far out, which is funny for somebody who likes strategy. But what I mean by that is I don't tend to project too far out and say, here, where am I going to be in 2 or 3 years' time, or what do I think about trying to imagine that place. I tend to be much more interested in the kind of here and now and trying to be within that. And I think, there's I don't really have a good answer to that.
No, that's fine. And is there a reason that you choose to, I guess, live that way?
It just seems to be my nature. It's my kind of
the same. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, it seems to be my nature. It seems to be how I operate. I don't I'm the kind of person that if I had a holiday that was kind of booked for somewhere, I'm not thinking about it until 2 days till I go.
Yeah.
It just doesn't enter my mind. Other people can obsess over that and just think
Digital
about
calendar.
Yeah, right. And they're like counting off days and I need to get this in place. And I've I think that's amazing if that's the kind of person you are, but I don't have that. I'm just okay.
Very present. Yeah.
What's going on? Like here and now, what am I thinking about? And and that has many drawbacks. Trust me, but that's who I am.
Darren, any final words of wisdom before we sign off?
I certainly don't have words of wisdom.
Oh, you do. I've enjoyed our chat so much. I'm so glad I harassed you for like a few months.
I would. Here's the one thing I think. I think about a lot that is, if you're willing to be curious and to really kind of recognize just how much knowledge is out there, and we've got access to so much of it. But one of the things I used the word humility earlier. Like the best thing that came from doing a PhD, and it's funny because you do a PhD and you're like, I'm producing a piece of work that a handful of people will read, right? Maybe at most 3 or 4 people, right? It's 120,000 words. It's a lot of, it's a huge thing that you produce.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's there because it's supposed to be a gateway to, a line of work, right? If you're going to do postdoc work, you say, okay, I've come to these findings, I've produced this thing, I've got some empirical work there. Okay, what's next? Do I carry on with it and so on, right? And that's really what it's there for. I didn't do that. I went off. I basically did my PhD while I was starting the business and running the business. So the two have kind of gone hand in hand. So I'm very kind of practical and pragmatic in that world. But the thing about the PhD, if it taught me anything, I had to cover so many literatures that just the sheer amount of work that had been done in these areas and how much we know and how little you could scratch the surface of is just an amazing thing for making you realize, well, whatever my tiny contribution is going to be, it's very unlikely to make any kind of difference, but it's not the point. The point is that you had the interest to go there in the first place, right? And so coming out of it with kind of, and I can see why you get Nobel laureate scientists who will talk about the kind of, standing shoulders of giants and so on, because they recognize that, they've just got their, tiny piece of the puzzle, if you like, right? Yeah. So I think natural curiosity is something we could do with more in this world. People having a natural curiosity to understand the positions of others, and to just to be quite pragmatic about that. We talk about silos, we talk about understanding the world from, why is it that people happen to see the world that they do, right? What does it look like to imagine if you could really truly understand what are the incentives of somebody that works in the finance department? What does their world look like for them from their position? And how might that kind of change how you think about it? That's a kind of curiosity that I think is important.
Yeah, I read a thing or heard a quote, I can't remember which one it was, but it said it's better to be curious than wanting to be correct. And I thought, that's really powerful. Instead of trying to push your view and hold that place of being correct, rather be curious. And like you said, why is this person acting in this way, or whatever the case may be. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Darren, where's the best place for our viewers to go should they wish to connect with you?
They probably LinkedIn, profile on LinkedIn. So yeah, if anybody wants to get in touch, I'm more than happy to have a conversation.
Thank you so much for today. We will pop all the links in the show notes below. This does wrap up season 2 of the Real Biz Life Chronicles. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Darren's office for our viewers is just across the way, and I'm often like, hey, when are you coming to the podcast? So I could not have asked for a better conversation to end the season on. So thank you so much. And
thank you for having me.
Great having a convo with you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.